Hello, everyone. My name is Camelia Shofani, and I am the Director of Public Programs and Events at the IDA. I'm a light-skinned Mexican Palestinian woman wearing a maroon t-shirt with a very bright background. I want to thank our media sponsors, KCRW and Variety, who also produced this Q&A for sponsoring our 2023 SpringDocs. This evening, we'll be having a conversation between Variety's senior entertainment writer, Angelique Jackson, director Allen Hughes, and executive producer Jamal Joseph, whose docuseries Dear Mama is currently streaming on Hulu. For more of our lineup, please visit documentary.org/SpringDocs. And before we get started, as always, I'd like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva and Chumash peoples as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Andrea Lust, for ASL interpreting this discussion. And with that, I will pass it on to Angelique Jackson. Thank you.
Variety is on the carpet for the premiere of FX's Dear Mama. This 5-part docuseries outlines the untold mother and son story that led Tupac to become one of the most influential rappers of all time.
Pissed off that he was often left to fend for himself.
He was suffering.
When I was young, me and my mama had beef, 17 years old, kicked out on the streets.
When you think about the legacy that we've seen, it's never been told from this perspective where it's so focused on mother and son and their relationship. Why was that so important to you?
Well, I was raised by an activist single mother. She was a feminist on the forefront of the women's movement. A little different, but the same, human rights. When I was asked to consider doing this, I said, there's a lot I don't understand about Tupac. I think he's one of the most misunderstood figures of the 20th century. And I said, I probably learn a lot more if I discover Afeni and her narrative. And it was really personal to me when I met Tupac. I think our bond, and it wasn't spoken, like when you meet people that don't have a father or didn't have a father, daddy issues, for lack of a better word, you tend to commiserate together, and outside of the creative stuff, that was our connection, was our strong mothers, and that was what I figured would be my end.
Well, Jamal, for you, as you kind of contributed and looked at your experiences with these two, what was it like to step back into this world and in particular look at it from the lens that Allen was asking to as the director?
Very emotional, and also joyful to be able to tell the story the way it really would have the most power and effect, which was that bond between Tupac and Afeni. But Allen found footage that I didn't know existed. Those moments with Afeni, moments with me in the Panther office, and reliving it. And every time I see it, it moves me. And I think the power of it is that everybody gets to feel like they've spent time a little bit with us as Panthers, a little bit with Afeni and Tupac, that everybody kind of feel that pull and fight back.
When you're figuring out how to structure a film like this, and fortunately we do have 5 episodes to tell this story in a really comprehensive way, how did you decide where to go, how to pace it, how to link their stories together?
Well, I have to start with my creative partner and co-writer and editor, Lasse Yarve. He's in the house. He worked on the Defiant Ones, and he's from Finland, but he has the soul of a blues man, and he's got this Chinese arithmetic spiritual mind that really helps me in my craziness. And it's just a great marriage because there's so many pieces, and you can't do these things by yourself. We had a wonderful editing team and production team and archival team. So it's like, it was painful. It's not easy to take two timelines. I did it with Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre, and that took a village. And, that was complex because it's two different generations you're talking about. And this one, I think the age difference was greater, but you just excavate, and you go where you start finding gems. You can only work with what is revealing itself. So we had to boil down, like, first of all, what's the theme? What are the themes? The sub-themes, I think, are sometimes more important than the theme. And what are the similarities between Afeni and Tupac? Because I always heard they were like twins. I'm like, how? And I learned the hard way. So you just start with great characters. People ask, like, all the time, what makes great story? How do you tell a great story? I say, start with great characters. And it's easy at that point. It's not easy to put together, but as you can see with Glow, and you'll see later was the obvious. There's a lot of people that are going to emerge throughout the episodes, and it's very surprising. Like a life well lived, great characters, and this shit is true. So some of it's really unbelievable,
When it comes to being a part of something like this and then seeing that footage pop up, what was a moment that really struck you that you were like, wow, I haven't seen that, or I didn't remember that, or I didn't see it that way then?
Well, there was a time that I was away that I mentioned the last time that I was in prison, and I was in touch with Afeni and Tupac. They wrote, but I did not realize how difficult the struggle had been. That they were, in Baltimore with the lights out, and that Tupac continued to read under the street lamp and do his homework under the street lamp. Those struggles, those deep, intense struggles. They visited political prisoners. They stayed in touch. They did that through the pain with the stomach growling, not realizing that some of those visits in the prison visiting room, when you get snack from the snack machine, that might have been his meal for the day. But still going to see political prisoners with his mom because that's what they needed to be despite what they was going through. So that was an intense resolution. As someone who was part of the extended family, you thought you knew, but you didn't know just how intense the struggle was.
Was there anything particularly challenging for you to step back into or relive?
Their death, Tupac's departure. By the time we made this, of course, Afeni was gone. It's hard to watch her. My wife, Joyce, who's with me, knows that at the end, just now, was fighting back tears when Fanny told that story about Tupac says, I'm not going to let anybody beat me again, fighting back those tears. So that just becomes fresh and vibrant. We feel their presence all the time in my household, and recalling those parts of the story, and every time I see it, it's really tough.
Allen, what about for you, both behind the camera and a little tease for you all in front of the camera?
It was tough, because I didn't, me and Tupac have a complex history, to say the least. But, I started my career with Tupac. Me and my brother started our career when we got a call from Tom Wally. These some Hughes guys, Tupac wants you to direct his video. We came to Interscope offices, and he was good as his word, and we directed the first 3 music videos off his debut album, Tupacalypse Now. And it was an intense friendship. But I also didn't know after the Defiant Ones if I wanted to do another documentary, because that one sent me to the loony bin. It really did. And Jimmy can tell you, 30 days in. So that really was the thing, too, because a lot of people, I think, do it differently than I do it. It's very personal. It takes a long time. So it just wasn't the personal part of it. But then when you sit with Snoop Dogg and you're exploring stuff that happened 25 years ago with a man who's now 50, who's had the opportunity to progress as a man and mature as a man, talking about his friend who didn't make it past 25. And I'm sitting with Snoop, and I'm 6 months younger, or I don't know what it is. We're all the same age. So that's a surreal experience to watch. You'll see as the series goes on, men talking about what boys did and the actions of boys who weren't yet men. And that's emotional,
When you think about kind of recapturing and reliving those moments that at the time, you couldn't have imagined that you'd be in this position today, looking back at them and analyzing them and dissecting them in this way. You're just living in those moments.
Yeah, when you're young and, it's all just, what they call it, piss and vinegar. So you metabolize trauma, you metabolize emotions very, well when you're young. You get up on 30, 40, you start going, what's this shit going on my back, my stomach, like my knees? And, then you realize youth is wasted on the youth somewhat. And it is, when I think back of being 19 and Tupac was 19 when we did those music videos, and when the family was sweet enough to ask me to do it and give me the opportunity to come full funky circle, as they say, and to explore not just his journey and his mother's journey, but all of our journey. I think you'll see in this film, it's a conversation. That's what makes it unique, the experience. It's a conversation.
But also, Alan, what made it exciting, we talked about this in production, is that through Afeni and Tupac, we revisit and we discover the times, the broader context. And I think for you, too, you listened so well to us as we talked about it as Panther veterans, what we were going through personally, but what was happening in America. And I remember this brilliant thing you said, this is like a Trojan horse. We'll get into people's living rooms and in their devices because it's Tupac and Afeni. But then when we open it up, people have to look at themselves in their America because that's who Afeni and Tupac are.
I mean, what is truly incredible about Afeni is that we should be studying her and the things that she and you all did in schools, and that is, I won't even go down that road right now. But I will say that, yes, this is an opportunity to, especially pay tribute to one of the women of the movement whose stories so often go untold. What is it like to be able to put that spotlight on your friend and for people to know the things that she did, in addition, of course, to being Tupac?
Well, that's the Afeni that I knew, that woman who was deeply caring, extremely radical, brilliant, and extremely tough. Like Alan, I was, raised by women, and the two mainly is my grandmother Nooni and Afeni Shakur, who taught me values of honesty. I remember one time I missed an appointment to speak at a school, and I remember Afeni dressing me down, but teaching me a lesson about honesty and keeping my word that resonates until this day. The same lessons that she would teach other young Panthers and that she would teach her son, but also that idea of struggle that, even as we are hungry, we have to feed other folks and kind of doing that. And probably the greatest lesson, brothers and sisters, is that what she was about and what Tupac was about, she said, Jamal, the goal of the Black Panther Party is not to make every man, woman, and child in the Black community Panthers, but to teach by examples of struggle and sacrifice, to teach them the possibility of struggle. And if we do that job, you won't need a Black Panther Party. People will understand how to fight for themselves. And real revolutionaries are not there for power. They're there to make themselves obsolete. Imagine that coming from one of the most powerful women in the Black Panther Party. Real leadership is to make yourself obsolete. If you've done your job, people will hear the message and hear the word. And that's who Tupac was, because that's who Afeni was.
When you think, Alan, of that type of power, that type of legacy, that message that can be put into the world with a story like this, what does it mean to you to have carried this to the finish line and for audiences to be able to see it here in just a couple of days?
It means everything to me because I remember now we had a moment, and Jamal was the first interview we did, and we were on break. And we were in Brooklyn looking out over Manhattan, and something came over me where I was like, wow, I finally feel why he passed, the meaning of his passing, Tupac's passing. Because again, I think for Afeni, her original message, her fight, her struggle with social justice and that whole cause, there's no greater beacon or bat signal than her son now. And to deliver that message. And it finally, Tupac's murder made sense to me because it never made sense to me. It was senseless seemingly, right? And when I was able to uncover what this woman did in the 20 years after he passed and her hero's journey, that's what gave me goosebumps. And that's what brought me back to my mom, as far as appreciating, because people don't know when you're raised by an activist, a radical activist, those mothers are coming home and telling those kids at 5 years old shit they should not know. Like really, like the kids are growing. You grow up real fast, and you see the world differently than most kids. So I think I have a lot of compassion for Tupac now. That I felt him before, and knew what made him special, but I have a lot of compassion for his journey through his mother.
Before you go, I did want to hear about any other of those key interviews, those key moments that you had while making this, just those, aha moments, if you will, that really locked in some of these themes. Where
do I start? Every interview, and there's Glow's whole family, Tupac's whole family, anyone that, I could think of Billy, Jamala, I could think of the Panthers you saw in this film. A lot of people in the whole journey. I think the thing that kind of hurt my heart and kept me going at the same time was sitting with what do we call them, Panther veterans, Jamal?
Yeah, Panther veterans for those of us who are still here, and Panther Cubs for our children.
Oh, wow. But I think during the making of this, the Roe versus Wade, we lost that, right? And someone pulled me aside and said, I think it was Nelson George too, we were talking about it, like this fight for human rights and social justice is an eternal fight. You don't get to this victory. You have to maintain whatever little victories you got. It's eternal, this struggle. And that hurt my heart because I guess I was naive enough to think something that Tupac even said he didn't think in his lifetime he would see. His mother sure didn't think it, but now to know like, wow, this is here. And as we've seen in recent times, it only just goes over there a little bit until someone brings it out. So here we are. We got to keep fighting.
When you reflect on Malcolm X, who is, as Ossie Davis said, our shining prince, our shining king, remember what Malcolm was at that age. Remember what Malcolm was at 18, 19, 20, 21. Autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm was a drug addict. He was a dealer. He was, a thug. And who he became. And his life cut short at 38. George Jackson, for people who are really studying revolutionary history, didn't learn how to read until he was in prison. And he's a scholar, right? If we think about that and think about what Allen was just saying, in his conversations with Snoop and other people and all of you who were young at that time, when Pac died, when you would talk to him, he wasn't talking about the next platinum record. He wasn't talking about the next big movie role. He was talking about youth programs across the country. He was talking about businesses like the Power Mecca Cafe. He was talking about Black-owned studios and radio stations to tell our story that way. He was talking about changing the political landscape. Can you imagine? And we can say these words as we think about people like Malcolm, like Dr. King. Can you imagine what the world would be like if those evolving brothers had lived? Can you imagine what the world would be like if Tupac Shakur had lived?